Okay, good morning. My name is Gary Matsuoka, and we're here at Laguna Hills Nursery in Santa Ana. It's Saturday morning, and today's class is going to be on growing grapes. So we find that grapes are one of the best producers you can grow in your garden locally, but you've got to choose the right ones. So there's grapes. So grapes are native uh, pretty much throughout the northern hemisphere. I think there might even be a few from the southern hemisphere, but the main grape that people think of when they think of grapes would be what's called the European grape, which is Vitis vinifera. That's the grape that comes from Western Asia, Eastern Europe. Wine grapes, most wine grapes are this type of European grape, and most of the commercial tape grapes are also that. So European. Generally, most people love the quality. Now, we're going to be talking mostly about the table grapes, the seedless table grapes, and most people have come to expect table grapes to be like the European table grape called the original table grape we had was Thompson seedless. But that's only its name here in the U.S. Around most of the world, the correct name is Sultana. I believe it's Sultana too, and it's from Persia. So this grape likes to be in Fresno. Fresno is similar to Persia. Riverside is similar to Persia. Uh, Orange County is not similar to Persia, at least where this grape originated. So they said Tom Seedless during this most of spring and summer does not like temperatures to be below 80 degrees or the humidity be above 50%. And the problem we have here is we spend a lot of time below 80 degrees, day or night. In Persia, it's 80 degrees at night too. And Fresno certainly can be that hot. And the humidity here is too high in the spring. So Thompson seedless in Orange County is highly subject to powdery mildew on the fruit. The leaves get it too, but it's the fruit that's the problem. So if you get mildew on the skin of a grape, that skin doesn't stretch properly and the grapes tend to split before they even ripen, which makes them all ferment on the vine. So now if you're on the very inland side of Orange County or in one of the canyons, the temperature and the humidity are probably okay. We have some customers who grow them in Fullerton or in the canyon areas, but this area here, success on it might be one out of every 10 years you might get a crop. So we generally don't recommend Thompson seedless. And the other one that's of European descent is Flame, which is the main red seedless you see in the supermarket. This one is a little bit less susceptible to mildew, but it's like one out of every 3 or 4 years you get a good crop on Flame. So we don't sell these two. If you want those two, you go to any other store that has, any other garden center, and they'll have Lehman Thompson because that sells because of the name. But doing well here, not so good. So the other grapes, other famous one would be um, this is sometimes it's called American grape, but it is the Lambrusca would be typically Concord. And that's the flavor of Welch's grape juice or, grape popsicles. That is from Concord. Now, Concord, most people don't like it as much eating wise. Some people love it, but most people don't like it eating wise because this grape has a real tough skin, but it's edible. You just have to chew it for a while, and it's got seeds. Now, there is a seedless Concord, which the fruit's about half the size. They're not a fan of that one. And this one is from New England states, so it's also known as the Eastern Concord. There is a California Concord, but we don't recommend it. California Concord was developed for the Central Valley because the Eastern Concord doesn't like the heat of the Central Valley. The California Concord loves it, doesn't like here as much. So we generally sell the Eastern Concord. We're out of stock. We usually get those in winter. But that one, so the Concord grapes in general and the American grapes in general differ from the European in appearance. Now, I don't have a true European here at the moment, but European grapes, the top of the leaf and the bottom of the leaf are very similar. They're both hairless. And this particular grape has got a lot of European in it, so it's fairly hairless on the bottom too. And in Persia, they use the grape leaves to pack food or to wrap food. So they want the grapes without the fuzz on them. The American grapes tend to have a lot of down on the bottom of the leaf. Hard to see on that particular one. Oh, this one. You see the top of the leaf and the bottom leaf. This is nice and felty on the bottom, which is not as pleasant for eating. But the American grapes, because of this, tend not to get mildew as much, or in conjunction with this, they tend not to get mildew on the grapes easily. So Concords rarely get mildew in Orange County. I haven't seen it. It's not totally resistant, but I haven't seen it. So what we grow here are primarily hybrids that are crosses between these, because these have that real tough skin, seeds, soft flesh. These have the thin skin, firm flesh, crispy flesh, we call it, and seedless. So they tend to hybridize these. There's another one in America, though, called Lightus, I believe it's Rotunda Velva. That's the muscadine grapes. So the Lambruscas are native to the New England states or northeast of the United States. Rotunda Velva or muscadine grapes are native from New Jersey through, I think, all the way down to Texas, or at least to Alabama. I think it's in the Gulf states anyway, the deep South. Um, and these, so it's a one way to tell this grape here has a lot of muscat in it. You can see the leaves are glossier, different texture altogether, different shape. They got more teeth on them. Um, they have, there's a lot of disease in the deep south, and the muscadine grapes have evolved immunity to most of them, which is one reason why they're becoming more and more popular, because they are resistant to diseases. So these are also used in breeding. And there's so many grape varieties. I mean, I think there's at least 40 around the world species of grapes, and so and variety wise, there's hundreds. There's just hundreds of varieties of names or cultivars being grown. We grow the ones that um, supposedly have a combination of the tender skin and the firm flesh of the Europeans combined with the mildew resistance of the American grapes. So that's the goal, is to have grapes that are more disease resistant. So the most important disease we get here is powdery mildew. But there's another one that's really nasty that is in Orange County. Well, it's spreading throughout the world, but it is in Orange County. So back in the 1800s, a German colony settled along the Santa Ana River and became Anaheim. So Anaheim means home by the Anna River, and they grew wine grapes there, and they did really well. They did really well for several years until around 1890, all their plants started dying. So they had to learn how to grow other things. They didn't know what was going on. In those days, we had no clue about bacterial diseases, but apparently, though they called it the Anaheim disease, it's still around. In 1920s, with microscopes, Dr. Pierce discovered it's a bacteria. Without a microscope, you can't tell it's a disease. So he renamed it, of course, after himself. Anaheim disease would be more, yeah, I think a better name, but now it's called Pierce's. So this is around. So there's now it used to be as bad a problem, but now we have a bug. So we've always had a little bug that can suck on the stems of grapes and transmit this disease. It's called a sharpshooter. Whoops. And the original sharpshooter in California was kind of small, so it didn't really go after that many plants. But a bigger sharpshooter came in the 1980s from Texas and Louisiana, where the muscadine grapes are native to, and it started spreading Pierce's disease like wildfire. And so in the 1980s, I grew a lot of grapes in my yard. I had about 8 or 9 grapes. And around 1990, every single grape except for one in my yard died. And then we learned about Pierce's. Go, okay, lost all my grapes to Pierce's disease, except for one. The Venus didn't die. So moved to another house, planted grapes again. Within 3 or 4 years, they all died. And at that point, they released a predator for the big sharpshooter. We call it the glasswing sharpshooter to knock its numbers down. So I replanted my grapes again. And after that, the only one that died was a flame grape. The rest of my grapes in my yard were fine after that. So they lowered the number of sharpshooters by about 90% by bringing in a natural predator that ate its eggs. The problem is it's still around. And at that point, I believe it was Mondavi sold all of its wineries or its grape vineyards in California and moved down to Chile. They opened up in Chile, sold everything in California, moved to Chile because of that bug, because they saw the handwriting on the wall. So the wine industry has spent millions of dollars trying to keep this thing from getting up to Napa Valley to spread diseases up there. I don't know if they've been successful. There was at one point at which they were spraying every truckload of nursery plants going north to Tehachapi. The ag agents had to stand at each nursery and watch them spray the entire truckload of plants for this pest. Now, Temecula had lost about 40% of the grapevines before they finally started to treat for it. So it was devastating Temecula too. So unfortunately, what they do in Temecula would not help you. So in Temecula, what was happening was that the sharpshooters are going in there and spraying this disease throughout their vineyard. So just imagine a vineyard, rows and rows and rows of plants. What they would do is take a chemical like the one in here, which is a systemic, that they would put in the irrigation water and make the entire plant poisonous, supposedly except for the grapes. So this goes up the plant through its inner xylem to the leaves and makes all the leaves poisonous. Supposedly the grapes are connected to a different system that's not connected, that goes from the leaves back down to the roots. The leaves make the sugars, the grapes are connected to that system, and supposedly this chemical doesn't get into the grapes, in theory. So all the wineries in Southern California have their vines totally poisoned, so that if the sharpshooters come in from the outside, uh, the outer rows of the vineyard act like sacrificial lambs. So the sharpshooters will go to these grapevines here, suck on a leaf, and die. In that process, they will inject the bacteria into some of these outer grapes, slowly killing them, but they don't make it to the inside of the vineyard. So most of the vineyard, if it's a big vineyard, is safe from that disease. However, the outer portions of the vineyard are not. I mean, the problem in your yard is if you only do your one, your one plant, it can still get affected. So we just grow them. I mean, in theory, your chance of getting it are not high. However, if you've got a lot of grapevines, like we know of a church in Fullerton planted 100 grapevines, they got hit really bad. So if you make your spot real inviting for the sharpshooter, it'll bring that in, and you're in Orange County because we have that disease here, as you can certainly get it. So it's hard to stop it. Now, what we know about Pierce's is that it does not affect muscat grapes because the muscadine grapes evolved along with Pierce's disease. So Pierce's disease is from the deep south, where the muscadines are from. They can catch it, but it doesn't affect them. So the muscat grapes are fine. And the Concord family or the Lambruscas are also highly resistant to Pierce's. So the darker your grape is, like the Venus in my house, never, at two houses, never caught it. So we think Venus, which has got a lot of, it's a dark, almost black grape with a lot of Eastern Concord genes in it, is resistant. Jupiter and Mars, which are also black grapes, and Jupiter does have a lot of muscadine. It's a muscadine hybrid, so it probably is resistant also, highly resistant. But that, whereas the white grapes, probably the white grapes like Interlake and probably not. Uh, so just know we have that Pierce's disease, which you have no protection against, except if you're in an isolated community. The chance of getting Pierce's is small, but it's still there since we're in Orange County, the home of the Anaheim disease. It's not the home. I mean, it's more prevalent in the deep south, but the grapes down there are resistant to it, are not affected. But the wine grapes, the big problem. A lot of growers are now planting what is called black Spanish, which is a different kind of grape that's immune to this Pierce's disease. Okay, so on growing grapes, the thing to know about grapes. So there's a lot of ways to train grapes in vineyards, and vineyards have their own method because they're growing thousands and thousands of grapevines. They want to make it as simple as possible for their workers to figure out how to prune these things. But the main thing to know is whatever grew last year has buds on it that'll make stems, new stems with grapes on it. So if it grew last year, it can make grapes this year. If it's from 2 years ago, no. So on this particular plant here, this branch here, from this point, I don't know if you can see it here. This is from 2 years ago. This is last year's growth that grew about, it grew probably about 15 foot long. So we kept this stem here, this piece of this stem, and put that's about a foot and a half. And anything growing off of this stem that grew last year is growing grapes this year. And you can see these are flower clusters coming out on every single stem coming off that branch. Now here's one that didn't grow a branch. Yeah, that bud got knocked off accidentally. But here we've got two clusters coming out here, a cluster coming out there, and one cluster coming out here also. Occasionally, if it's a real strong branch, they'll make three clusters on that stem. Now with table grapes, if you want them to be bigger grapes, cut off all but one cluster on each stem, and bigger cluster also. So if you want the biggest cluster of grapes, remove one of the clusters. If you want just lots of grapes, no matter what size, keep all your clusters. So you can cut and generally grapes can grow 25 foot in a year.
Nice.
So if you don't want your grapes to take over your entire yard, you cut off all but the last foot or two of your plant, or they say 3 foot for most cane pruning, or okay, there's two kinds of pruning you can do. Once, and they're really the same thing. So one kind of pruning is called cane pruning, and that's when you leave the last 2 to 3 foot of the best canes that grew last year. I mean, grapes grow canes all over the place, off of old wood, off of new wood. So you take the nicest looking, thick, generally thickest branches from last year, and you save 2 or 3 foot of them, which may be, each leaf had a node, and then that would be essentially probably about 8 or 9 nodes that you're saving on 2 to 3 foot. And each node can make another stem with grapes hanging on it. Now the other one is called spur pruning, and that's when you only keep the last few inches of each stem that only has 1 or 2 spurs on it, or 1 or 2 nodes on it. So you cut it down to only a few inches, and then you'll get just a few stems with grapes on them. Most wine grapes are done that way. They don't want a lot of grapes. They want a few grapes with all the plant's energy going to that. Most table grapes grown cane pruning, but a few of them are grown spur pruning too. Essentially the same thing. It's just the length of the grapevine that you're saving on them. But in most cases, you're cutting off, 90 to 99% of the plant every winter just to keep it from taking over your yard. These grapes just keep on growing. So one grape plant easily 100, 50 foot that way, 50 foot that way. And they actually say wild grapes in nature can grow over 100 foot up in a tree. So that's a long line. Um, Water wise, for table grapes, if you want big grapes, lots of water. Lots of water. Keep that thing wet. For vineyards, they back off on the water because they don't want so much water in the wine. So they grow grapes at what is called 60% of normal watering, which is really restricting it. They said homeowners, it's hard to do. They use computers to figure that out. So they water a lot of the wine grapes only 60% of what the plant actually wants to use. Yes.
One time I was up in Paso Robles and I was on a tour and they were explaining how on the ocean side of the highway, meaning 101, they would irrigate, but a lot of them on the other side were dry farmers. They did not irrigate and they would say those roots would go 30, 40, 50 feet.
Oh yeah.
Like
Grapes.
water. And they come out with very good grapes.
Yeah. Yeah. Grapes are really strong plants. I mean, if you don't water them, they won't die. But yeah, if you want big grapes, which most people want with the table grapes, and lots of water. Again, wine grapes not as necessary to give them a lot of water. So the wine companies did fine during the drought. Table grape people had to use more water. It's interesting. I had a grape, interlaken grape, and for 10 years I thought it was a small grape because I was watering it, but it was only getting about the size of my fingernails. And then my neighbor decided that they would finally start a garden on the other side of the fence, and suddenly my grapes got bigger So I knew, okay, uh, since he wasn't watering his yard at all, and I was only watering my side, my grapes roots weren't getting enough water. I guess they're on his side of the fence too. Once he put a garden in on his side, my grapes grew a lot bigger. So I know that most grapes get big if you water them a lot. Okay, so now the original. We look on the internet or look in a lot of books. One of the original ways to train grapes was to, from the ground, you'll have wire that 3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot, and they would grow the grape plants here and train branches going two directions. And what I drew in green here, this would be the permanent structure, so it would get nice and heavy after a while. And then they would take, so this would be permanent, and they would be, oh, let's say, this is 3 foot off the ground, but 3 to 8 foot wide would be the distance across. So depending on the grape, most grapes easily can grow 8 foot, 4 foot this way, 4 foot that way. And again, they can grow 50 foot this way and 50 foot that way, but most vineyards, to most vineyards, the grapevines are cheap. You just plant a whole bunch of them, and then you get this coverage the first year. You don't have to wait a couple of years for the grapes to grow 50 foot that way and 50 foot that way. They'll do it. They'll do 8 foot the first year, 4 foot this way and 4 foot that way. And then what they'll do is they'll take the stems, the new growth coming off, and put them on the top wire. And let them grow that way. And then the next year, they will take this 2 foot of this stem, 2 or 3 foot of this stem, and then tie it to this middle wire. And the new growth then again is direct to the top wire. But the stems that are now growing grapes are located right here. So they're growing, grapes are hanging like this, with the new growth of these vines going like this. So they take the vines, the first year vines from here, put them on here to make the fruit. And most times, once they make the fruit, they cut this one off, unless they don't have any better looking stem there. But generally, grapevines will grow a lot of new stems, so they'll keep taking the ones that made the grapes and cut them off, take the nicest looking ones from the top wire, put them on the second wire. That was one of the original ways they did it. Now, one of the reasons that another reason they do this, make it all even like this, is because if the stem is up here, the grapes it makes ripens faster than if they're down here. So if they're all in the same space, they'll all ripen at the same time. And that's, of course, what a vineyard would want. If they're making wine, they want to pick everything all at once. So the right same height, same thing. For a homeowner, for table grapes, having all grapes at once is not the big deal. So you can grow this any way you like. The ones up here ripen first, the ones down here ripens last. The main thing you know is which stems to keep every year, so you don't have to follow what they're doing. Now, one of the new ways to grow grapes is to have a few more wires going up. So what they discovered is that if you attach a grape to a support, it just keeps going. It just keeps going, going, going. It can grow even 30 foot in 1 year. However, if you grow, instead of growing the grapevine horizontally, you grow it vertically, straight up to the top of that wire and let it hang off in space somewhere. It grows out about 5 or 6 feet, and the end dies. if it can't find support, it stops growing. And a lot of vineyards saying this is much easier than to have a 50-foot vine. You got to cut 40 foot of it off, 45 foot of it off every year. Just let it go straight up and hang out in a space, and it just stops. So this is called vertical cordons now, to have the horizontal stuff. And a lot of vineyards have switched to this method where they just go a little taller wire, let the vine just naturally go up and off of it, and it comes off about this far. And we noticed that at our house a long time ago. Yeah, it comes off the support this far, and it just stops. They can't find anything to hang on. It just stops. It's weird. I mean, the plants have a nervous system. They can say, well, we're not attached to anything anymore. Just stop growing. But that's what they found out. So that they said it's much easier just for all the stems. Now, not all grapes are good this way, but most of them are. Going straight up and off, and there's a lot less to prune. Now, one of the things also that they discovered at my house, 20 years ago, said, well, I got these grapes going right here. Do I need 20 foot of growth to service those grapes to make them do well? So I would cut this off about 4 foot after the clusters, and they would be fine, and I'd be fine. So the wine industry also had University of California figure out how much they need to keep after that grape cluster to keep the plant healthy and the grapes good. They said 2 foot. 2 foot is all you need. If you have less than 2 foot, the grapes will still form, but that stem will not have enough strength to do anything else, and it'll die after the grapes are developed. This one accidentally broke off this morning at 1 foot beyond the grapes. Now it'll regrow, so that it'll be fine. In fact, there's a new growth right there right now. But if I kept cutting it like this, and the grapes are right here, this may not be enough to keep the stem alive. The grapes may use all the energy of that plant, and that stem doesn't have enough strength for next year's crop. So 2 foot beyond the grape clusters, you can cut your vine off. I'd play it safe. I go 4 feet, 3 or 4 feet is better. Now it's interesting in the vineyards, they also found out that, they usually traditionally they would run the row crops north-south so that the grapes on the east side and the west side would get the same amount of light. But because the afternoon is hotter, they found out that if they ran it true north-south, the grapes on the west side would ripen a little before the ones on the east side of the vine. So now they run it about like this. North being here and south being here. They run it slightly to the east so that the east side gets sunlight longer than the west side does by an hour or so. So the east side ripens same time as west. That's a minor thing, but that was interesting that they actually do that. So now there are controls for mildew, but none of them seem to work that well. I mean, the organic growers use neem oil. Now, one of the interesting things they've done in vineyards, you go to vineyards, they got roses. You go to a well-established vineyard, they always have roses. And one of the reasons, and it's usually iceberg roses on top of that, one of the reasons they say is that the iceberg roses will come down with powder mildew about 2 weeks before the grapes do. So that's their sign that they got to start treating for mildew. That's why they have roses at vineyards. So the organic farms would use the neem oil. It hasn't worked that well here. We're just too much mildew weather here. I mean, this is mildew weather. There are chemical controls for mildew that work a lot better, but we would rather not have to use chemical controls. So you stick with the right varieties and you don't live too close to the ocean, then you should be fine. Any questions on how to grow grapes? We'll go over the varieties in a second here. So ample water, I mean, what we mean by ample water is the soil wet at least a foot deep at all times when there's grapes on the plant. And that means that if you have a piece of rebar this thick or just a wooden rod about that thick, you can push in the ground a foot deep at all times when the grapes are on the plant. That means there's enough water in that soil to get the grapes going, yes.
How far north does this disease go in California? Because you said it's not up in Napa, but it's down here.
No, the disease is all over, but the bugs that spread it are not. Or well, I haven't seen, so I haven't gotten too much information from the grape growers recently because they were alarmed that some of the shiploads of plants from Southern California and some even the produce from Southern California going north had sharpshooters in it. So, but I don't know. I have a feeling that most of the grape growers just treat their vines with systemics now, but I don't know. I haven't heard. Yes.
Do you guys have any kinds of grapes?
Yes. Oh yeah, we'll talk about those. So yes.
I'm growing grapes. I don't know which year, last year, that just plant that's very good. How do I tell us last year's growth and where to trend to? At the market or how would I know?
Well, once you start growing grapes, you'll know that the new growth is very smooth and green, but toward the end of the year it can get tan,
Uh-huh.
and then as it gets really old, it gets split. The bark gets real flaky.
Uh-huh.
But even on any really vigorous plant, even the first year growth can get flaky. But you'll just know because it had leaves on it. Whatever has a leaf on it this year is this year's growth. If it doesn't have any, if in the fall there's no leaves on that branch, it was last year's. But the leaves hang on until winter usually.
So in the winter then what's going on with them?
Well, say so here's this plant that's growing this year. So this is this year's growth from here all the way to the end of this branch. So you know if you keep the entire growth, it'll make a lot of grapes, more grapes than you've ever seen, but your plant will be about 20 foot longer. That's the problem. So in order to get grapes next year, you've got to keep at least a few inches of this stem. You don't have to keep much. 2 to 3 foot is average. And the rest of it you cut off. So you're cutting off, you may be cutting off 10 to 15 foot of your branch every year. Like we cut off this plant, this was wound around here many, many times and going off into space about 5 or 6 feet. We cut off at least 10 foot of this growth to save this piece right here is what we saved this last winter, which was only about a foot and a half maybe. Again, if you cut it too short, they'll still grow vines, but you may not get any grapes. Occasionally, you'll see grapes growing on new growth that's coming off of old wood, but usually it's new growth that comes off of last year's wood. So, whatever grew last year growth grapes this year.
That then just gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time. At some point I have to cut it.
Well, okay, so here we're maintaining this structure 8 foot across, 3 foot off. That's your permanent structure. And then these branches are the one you're cutting short every winter. And you can thin them out too. You don't need all these. So you have one branch this long, 2 foot long. That's already up to 20 clusters of grapes you can get off of one branch that you save that's 3 foot long. So you don't need to save many of those. You can save, 3 or 4 of those on your plant on the top of this stem. Let's say we'll save 4 on each side. And so that's like 50, 60 clusters of grapes right there. And then you get new growth coming off. And the next year you cut off all the ones that made the grapes and save some of the new ones that came up. you're not letting the plant really grow. I mean, it's going to be essentially the same size for the next. Grapevines can live 30, 40 years. Next 30, 40 years, you can be the same size. And all this part here, this permanent structure can get like that thick. I mean, on my 20-year-old, I had one, well, the longest I had it was 15 years. Got about that thick. I can imagine in some of the vineyards, 40-year-old vineyards, they got to be like tree stumps by that time. So yes.
For that main growth, what's the natural lifespan? Like 40 years, 50 years, 100 years?
40 is what they say is about max for Napa Valley, but I'm sure grapes can live longer than that. But for best production, a lot of plants produce best in their first 20 years, and then it gets worse and worse as they get older.
So I'm trying to conceptualize structuring the yard around grape plants and also for some privacy behind the back fence. I've got a 6-foot fence and really, really ugly sheds behind that, my neighbors. So I'm thinking 8-foot posts and some horizontals above the fence line. And you talk about wires, but for some sort of a visual block, I'm thinking 2x4s. And sometimes I'm thinking maybe 2x2s, but I'm concerned about the weight and whether that would be strong enough.
Grapes aren't super heavy. Like kiwis, they say you need 4x4. Everything's gonna be 4x4s on kiwis because they're monster, they're super heavy plants. The grapes, since we cut them so much, there's not that much weight on them. But it certainly wouldn't hurt to have the stronger structure, 2x2s at least. 1 inch is usually pretty kind of weak.
And when you talk about wires, I don't know how much weight that's
Well, grapevines, I think they use 14 gauge, which is 1/14 of an inch thick
okay.
gauge. 16 gauge is 1/16 of an inch thick, 14 gauge 1/14. I think they use 12 and 14 gauge wire just to put grapes.
You think 2x2 would be too light?
The 2x2 stake.
2x2 horizontal?
No, that's pretty strong. 2x2 is pretty thick. You should be good with that. I mean, so at my last house, I grew grapes on a 3-foot wide trellis that was 6 foot tall, and I got maybe 30 clusters off of just something that big. Of course, the grapes grow off about 5 foot in all directions. I had one fence line that had 75-foot wrought iron fence covered with one grape plant. And then my patio roof, we put the grapevine up one of the posts and let it cover the entire patio roof. In fact, I had 2 grapes on the patio roof, one from one side, one from the other, and they were kind of mixed up in the middle. And the grapes would hang down through the center. Unfortunately, the raccoons like to sit on top of my patio roof and grab the grapes. But I also had a situation where I didn't have any dirt close to my patio roof on one side. So the grapevine was about 8 foot away from the patio roof. We grew it in the ground 8 foot away, ran it up a post that was the same height. And once it got long enough, we just stretched the vine all the way to the patio roof. So there's this big trunk going straight up and across to the patio roof.
Without horizontal support?
What, right. Well, yeah, we took the pipe off after a few years. We haven't gone up the pipe. So, yes.
So I have a thinking about growing the grapes on a cattle panel at 16 feet by 5 feet or something like that. Just have it vertically and mounted on T-posts, right? So it's like this. That would work.
Really? Yeah. Any shape you want. I've trained grapevines in the shape of an S. There's no rules on how you shape it or how long it is that you're keeping the main structure. Like on my patio roof, I just said, okay, I'm going to keep this main one going down the center of my patio roof and grow my vines off of that 2 directions. So that's how we did that one. But I changed it periodically. I would cut everything off and let it regrow. So
for a 16-foot cattle panel, how many grape plants, right? Wow.
One will easily fill it in a year. I mean, this grape plant here can grow about 15 foot this year. Just one stem then, but you can let it grow 2 or 3 feet, clip it in, or bend the top over, and then it'll start another branch off the side. If it's grown vertically, it stays as one stem. If you bend it over like this one will grow. You'll have two stems to work with.
So for 16 feet, I just need one plant?
Yeah, you could put two on there. I mean, there's no rules there either. Again, some vineyards plant a new grape plant every 3 foot. There are some really non-vigorous wine grapes that they grow, but most table grapes it's 8 foot between plants. So there's no rules there. I mean, I had one grape plant covering 75 foot of fence. So, the first time I ever grew grapes, I didn't know anything about training. I thought the thing grew on the ground. And the next year I had 30 clusters of grapes on the dirt. They were fine. You don't have to grow them on a support.
Somebody else was eating them though, weren't they?
Yeah. So the grape plants themselves look like this. I've got a couple 15 gallons that I'm growing for sale, but most of our bigger grapes, we make these grapes by propagating from that. So what's neat about grapes is at the end of the year, and this is how vineyards do most of the grapes too. A piece of stem, 3 nodes long, easy, about that thick. You just cut it there, stick in the ground up until the last node, and it grows. Most of them grow about, I would say, 90% of the cuttings that you take grow. Now, not all grapes are that easy. There's some grapes that are really difficult, but that's how we grow all these grapes. We just took a piece of stem off that was about that long, stuck in it. Now we used our acid mix, which is a sterile growing medium. We put it in there, so it's down to about here. Growing roots out the bottom. You can see the roots coming out the bottom there, and then one or two of the nodes will grow. Occasionally, the top node doesn't grow, and I have a grapevine that grows from one of the bottom nodes and comes straight out the dirt that way. These are a bit young yet. This one's not bad. We like the grapes to be at least 18 inches tall before we transplant them because this one may not have enough root to hold that root ball together yet. Now this one's got a few flower clusters on it forming, so it wants to grow grapes this year, which is fine. I mean, if you're in Minnesota, you would just take those off because the growing season there is only 4 months. But here, our growing season is pretty much year round. So even if it's these grapes that's forming right there, stalled it until June or July when you harvest them. The rest of the year, it'll still grow 10 feet the rest of the year. So. And also, when they're this young, where they join up on this cutting is a little weak still. So if you bend it too much, it'll snap it off. So soil-wise, grapes really don't care about soil quality that much. They said Napa Valley is kind of like Orange County. The valley floors near the hills are sandy, and then the hills in Napa Valley are all clay. They grow fine on both. They ripen first in the sandy soils. They ripen later in the clay soil. So in the clay, everything's a little slower. In the sands, everything's a bit faster. So, but soil quality doesn't matter that much.
Why do they like it? Here.
Most of our table grapes, first ones will be at the very beginning of summer, like late June. Most grapes ripen in the month of July, and they'll all hang on. I mean, if animals don't get them, they'll hang on for months and months after they're ripe and get sweeter and sweeter. They said the Romans used to cut off the stems with the grapes clusters on them and put them in their wine and their cellars in a vase of water and hold them that way until winter. Of course, our supermarkets hold our grapes all year round, it seems. So,
Yeah.
if they're on the stem, it keeps them going for quite a while. Now, we've seen that grapes can make a second crop. So once this vine grows out and the first crop ripens, if you cut that vine back severely, it wants to grow another, it doesn't want to stop in the middle of summer. So it regrows, and a lot of times when it regrows, it makes a new crop of grapes. Second crop never has been as nice as the first crop, though. But we have usually, because we're cutting these mother plants back to keep them out of our way, we do get a lot of growth on those too, and and some grapes forming in the fall. So you can grate grapes in the fall. Fertilizer wise, grapes don't need much. Generally, they say vineyards, once when they get planted, they don't fertilize for 7 years. So just watch your grape plant the first year. Now in a pot, you don't need to fertilize, but in the ground, they generally are good at finding their own fertilizer or minerals in the ground. So I would say if you're getting at least 10 foot of growth a year, don't feed. I mean, the ground, and when I've grown grapes in my yard, I've never fed them directly. I mean, there's plants around that need fertilizer, but I have never fed them. They've always done just fine. I mean, they find their food. But again, if they are pale green and they just slow down, feed them. You might have a very neutral soil or something. We haven't seen any problems with pH. They seem to be fine in our slightly alkaline conditions.
If
Okay.
you're planting them in a container, you would need to feed them, right?
Well, the problem with grapes is if the soil gets dry between irrigations, the grapes either stay small or crack. Now, the 15 gallon, we're getting decent sized grapes on them, but they're bigger if you have them in the ground, just because the ground never, generally doesn't dry up like a pot would.
Mm-hmm.
So in containers, if you keep it well irrigated, you're fine. I mean, I've got 1.5 barrel back here, and it's not that. The grapes don't get huge on it, but they're still great. We still eat them all. So like the one in the front is in a big pot, but it's rooted through the asphalt and the ground below the asphalt. So the grapes on that one get real nice and big.
So I can use my pot, but I should put a big hole in the bottom.
Or just water several times a day, or put a saucer of water underneath it.
Yeah. It's
So-
too big for that.
Yeah, I have saucers that are big enough for a 15 gallon. That'd be a few inches wider. And that'll just help it through the day. It won't stay wet in the saucer for mosquitoes. It'll just keep it going throughout the day. Okay, let's talk about the grapes. So we'll start with the whites, which aren't really white, but they're light pale green or pale yellow. So the white grapes our longtime favorite has been one called Interlaken. There's another one we grow called Lakemont. And just so you know, okay, so these are both crosses between the original Thompson seedless and a grape from Canada, a grape called Ontario, which I assume is from Canada. And these were developed for the humidity of the Great Lakes area. They do really well here. Interlaken, Lakemont. Interlaken, we call it a golden grape. And for a lot of our customers, they'll tell you this grape has the nicest texture they've seen of a hybrid. So again, everything we're growing are hybrids. So this one, very similar to Tom Seedless in the texture, the tenderness of the skin and the crispiness of the flesh, but it does have a distinct Chardonnay flavor. to the grape. So it's quite good. We do like that grape a lot. It's a nice texture, really good flavor. Now, Lakemont is very close to Thompson Seedless. Green, similar flavor, a little bit softer than Thompson, but quite close. So we do like Lakemont also. There is a third, these are both siblings, same parentage. There's a third sibling which we don't grow because the mildew is called Himrod. But Himrod is famous in a lot of catalogs. You'll see the name Himrod, and it's famous because it makes these monster clusters. Like clusters that are like in might be about 20 to 30 grapes, small clusters. Same with Lakemont, 20 to 30 grapes. Himrod makes these really big clusters that are real impressive. All the grapes tend to be on the small side, and it's too much mildew for ours. So we gave up on Himrod. Some other green grapes really like University of Arkansas did what is called the Planet Series, and a lot of their grapes are really good. Then we grow one called Neptunes. This might be one of the whitest grapes we've seen. It's a very light colored, light green grape. And everybody comments it's a beautiful cluster. It kind of looks ivory, the Neptune. And I like them. I like the Neptune. I can't say the flavor. Well, they say the flavor is pretty much like Thompson Seedless also. Um, but that one's good. So we do like Neptune a lot. And then the last grape called Rameli. Oh no, I have another one. It's called Spartan also. So Spartan and Rameli. Rameli, really big green grapes. Really big, real meaty. I mean, they say it's even more meaty than Thompson. I grew this back in the 80s, and I really liked it at that time too. So they're big green grapes with a lot of body to them, so they call it meaty. Meatier than the Thompson Seedless. The only problem with Rameli is if you have too much sun on the grapes, they start turning orange or brownish colors rather than green.
Are these seedless?
Yeah, all seedless. Everything we're doing is seedless. We quit selling the seedy ones. Most of them didn't like them. Then Spartan's the last white seedless. Also really good. Alan, who works for us, that's his favorite of the seedless. I like Neptune and Interlaken myself, but some people really like Lakemont. But those are the white grapes. All hybrids. Now the white grapes are more susceptible to mildew than the other colors. So they have more Thompson seedless in them, so they're more susceptible. So no, if you live closer to the ocean than we do, say Costa Mesa area, you might have trouble with the white grapes. I haven't really figured out which one of these is less susceptible. I mean, the only time in our nursery we've ever gotten grapes, when we had a growing ground in Irvine, one year we got hit, this is 2015, we got hit really bad. All the grapes except for the black grapes got mildew that year. But I haven't, here, we haven't seen any mildew at all on any of these grapes that affected the fruit at least. So, okay, that's our white grapes. Our light colored grapes. Red has been the most popular. And the best selling red grape we've ever had is called Suffolk Red. Which is, I'm not sure clear the genetics on it. They say it's Russian crossed with American, but it eats like a European. So I'm not sure. I guess Russian grapes are real close to European grapes. Anyway, Suffolk Red. This is a Suffolk Red here. This is the one we have in front of our store that covers everything up. It's a large, really light colored red grape. So almost well, it's still kind of a light burgundy, I guess you call it. I mean, the first year I grew Suffolk Red, they were just barely pink, pretty much green. But we noticed when the Suffolk Red is young, the grapes taste like cotton candy. I mean, for 5 years, grapes taste just like cotton candy. Even on the older grapes, the grapes are getting darker red now on that one. People still say this is the sweetest grape I've ever had. So it is among the hybrid grapes, one of the best tasting we've ever seen. Now, it's got a daughter called Reliance. Can't remember where that was developed from, but they crossed Suffolk Red with Ontario to make it more disease resistant and got Reliance. Now they say on the east of Rocky Mountains, this is one of the best tasting grapes, better than Suffolk Red. On the West Coast, we're not sure if it's true or not. We're not sure of our climate here, but they said down in the deep South, this Reliance is incredibly good. Better than Suffolk. Here, we're still figuring out which one's better. They're both really good. So Reliance and Suffolk Red. I didn't bring one out. I think my Reliance are a little bit small yet. And then another really good red grape is Einset. So Einset is the closest thing we have to plain grape in taste, which they say is kind of a strawberry flavor. This was developed in the state of New York, named after their pomologist, Robert Einset. Very mildew resistant, maybe the best among the red grapes. We planted one down at the fairgrounds. I think they've done fairly well there, even though that's pretty close to the ocean. So Einsets are kind of small yet they're not on display. I mean, you can buy them, just leave them in the pot for at least another month. So this is similar to Flame. I think I'm missing a grape. We might have some Vanessa, or we may not. That's a decent grape too, in the red. Uh, Now, Canada's, just so you know that name, a lot of books will tell you on the East Coast that is their favorite grape. We've grown it here. One of my employees really loved it. I don't know. I haven't found it to be all that exciting. Then the real unusual one we have is razzmatazz. So this is a totally unique grape. This is the one that's mostly muscadine from the deep south. Suppose the book says it's immune to all the grape diseases, so this doesn't get any mildew at all, doesn't get Pierce's disease at all. It was promoted 5 or 6 years ago as a patio grape because it doesn't get as big. So in more temperate climates than ours, it may only reach 7 foot. Here it reaches about 10 or 12 foot. But the unusual thing about muscat grapes, now the true muscats, no one here would like them. If you're from the deep south, you grew up with them. They say the berries are quite large. They have seeds. The skin is like plastic. So they said if you're native to the deep south, you know how to eat them. You take one grape, you put it between your cheek and your teeth, and you bite down on the skin on one side of that grape to break it, and the seeds and the juice squirt into the middle of your mouth. So you spit the seeds out, you drink the juice, and you chew on the skin because the skin's got real good flavor. But then you spit the skin out because it's pretty much inedible. So that's muscat. And that's what they're used to down there. But no one here would probably buy a muscat. Now, this hybrid, they cross it with the European grape. And well, the other thing about muscats is they don't ripen. They don't grow with clusters the way that European grapes do, where you get one set of flowers for the year that ripens in early summer. The muscat grapes grow for a while, and then at a certain point, every single leaf they make has a little flower cluster on it. So instead of making a few huge clusters of grapes, they make clusters of about 10, well, anywhere between 5 and 20 grapes in a cluster. And every leaf will make a cluster as long as it keeps growing, and this thing will grow all the way into November. It's trying to make clusters of grapes. So the grapes on a muscat hybrid like this generally start around July or August and will go all the way into January. You can eat grapes. Not a whole lot at one time. Um, the thing about the razzmatazz, it's got really thick skin, but it's edible. So it's fun to eat it. It's really sweet, no seeds. The skin is thick, almost like fruit leather. So you're eating this grape and you're chewing on the skin. It's quite good. It's a very nice sensation. So it's a good grape. The grapes tend to be small, really tiny if you grow in a pot. I mean, only the size of peas. If you grow them in the ground, you might get something as big as a dime, or the book says nickel. We haven't seen quite that big in California. Maybe in Texas, where they come from, they'll grow nickel size. Here, more like penny size at the biggest. They're on the small side, but it is a small. The original picture had them in a pot. Now, the other thing about this grape, this is really hard to propagate. So, whereas stem cuttings, 90% take on that, stem cuttings on this, 2% take. So we've given up on stem cuttings. You take 100 cuttings, you get 2 plants. It's just not worth the effort. So we have to do it take the new growth off in the summertime and root them in our greenhouse under plastic. We get about 60% take on those. So it's a pain to reproduce. The original plants on the market 5 years ago were going for about $100 for a plant smaller than this. We make these 40 because they're really a pain to propagate. Recently on the internet, I've seen them down to about 45. So we bought this. It was just under trademark. Now I hear it's patented, so I'm not supposed to sell these anymore. But I don't recall that. Do you? Okay, so that's your red grapes. Now the darker grapes, which we call black, but they're actually either deep burgundy or blue, dark blue red, or what color you want to call that. The one we've been growing longest is another one. Well, University of Arkansas made a whole series, so they have Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. I think Saturn is also, well, Saturn might be a red grape. Saturn's the only one we didn't do well with, so we don't carry Saturn. And then Neptune's a white grape. I don't know if they did a Pluto yet or a Mercury. Maybe they're saving those for later. Anyway, Venus, we've been growing the longest since the 80s. Never seen Pierce's on Venus. Um, One of the best tasting grapes you've ever had. The skin's a little bit tough. Yeah, it's not bad. And sometimes the flesh is a little soft. What I love to do with my Venus is freeze them. You freeze a Venus grape, and then you pop in your mouth, and you can swear, this is grape popsicle. It tastes like grape popsicle. So Venus, awful good flavor. They said it's sweet enough to be made into wine. So Venus, this is Venus here. It's got a real felty leaf. Now Jupiter maybe be more resistant to pierces than Venus. Jupiter is supposed to be a muscadine hybrid. This is Jupiter. And everyone here thinks Jupiter may be the best tasting grape we've ever eaten. Even better than Venus. Slightly redder than Venus, but still considered a black grape. Then here's Mars, a real vigorous guy. Not quite as good as Jupiter or Venus, but still, better than most things you buy in the store. So those are your main. I think that's all the black grapes. Jupiter, Mars, Venus. Oh, one I don't have at the moment, but we'll probably end up getting these Tom Cord. And that's supposed to be a UCLA project. Some grad student crossed a Tom Seamus and a Concord grape. And he got something right in the middle, which is really weird. You eat a Tom Cord grape, and you can taste the Thompson Seamus in it, but you can also taste the Concord in it. It's right in between. They said this has become one of the farmers market's favorites because they sell it as a seedless conch, even though it's not the original seedless Concord, which is small black grape with thick skin and soft flesh. This one is the hybrid between Thompson and Concord. It's still a black grape, and it's not as Concordy as the seedless Concord is, but it is a good grape. So,
If you grow more than one type in your area, would they interpollinate?
well, I don't know. They don't make seeds. Yeah. I mean, to develop these grapes, they have to take a seedy grape. Of course, you get a seed. Hybridize it with a seedless one, and then the offspring could be seedless. But yeah, if you cross two plants, it affects the seeds and not the fruit. So say the only plants that you affect crop on are, say, whatever you eat that's a seed. So if you grow corn, you grow a yellow corn and white corn, and they cross pollinate, then the seeds come in all different colors. Whereas with grapes, the flesh of the grape and everything is due to the mother's genetics and not any pollen that comes by. But I don't know, the grapes need to even be pollinated. Bees still come though.
So you only need one plant. One plant will work.
Right, right. And in the wild, grapes are usually either male or female, and you need both in the wild. But once Thompson seedless came around, it doesn't require apparently it doesn't require pollination, or it's got both sexes in it in the same flower, so you don't need one plant. But yeah, if you have wild grapes, most of them won't fruit by themselves. Any other questions? So we have a display of these grapes just beyond the little avocado trees out there. And again, try to wait till they're about this tall before you pull them out of the pot and plant them. And if you don't see what you want out there among these names, we can probably find it for you somewhere in our growing ground area.
When I was a kid, all the area of Ontario and Rancho Cucamonga and stuff was all vineyards. Were those wine growing or were they table grapes out there?
That I don't know.
Because you can still see, you drive down to 15 and in between some of those buildings, you can still see some of the old remnants of.
I don't know. That's a good question. What were they?
They were probably wine because if I remember right, there was some vineyards, winemaking facilities out there.
Okay.